It was supposed to be a perfect evening. At least, that's what I kept telling myself as I stood in the kitchen, stirring the pot of stew. My family was finally together for the holidays, after what felt like ages. My parents, my brother, even my aunt had flown in from another city. Everyone was supposed to be happy, sharing stories, and basking in the warmth of family love. But from the moment I heard my dad's voice rise just a little too loud across the room, I knew this wasn't going to be just another family dinner. I set the spoon down and walked over to the living room where my parents were seated. First, it seemed harmless enough. They were discussing something trivial: who was going to host the next holiday, some disagreements over old family traditions. But there was something in my dad's voice, that edge I knew too well. His frustration was growing, and he was doing what he always did, trying to talk louder to assert his point. And then came my mom's response. She was quieter as always, but I could tell her calmness was more of a defense mechanism than a peaceful demeanor. She said something I didn't catch, and my dad snapped back, his voice colder now. I wanted to intervene to lighten the mood. "Come on, guys," I almost said. "It's not a big deal." But before I could speak, my brother, Tom, stepped in. Tom was usually the peacemaker, always the one to keep things lighthearted, but today, something seemed off. Instead of diffusing the tension like he usually did, he only made it worse. "You always do this, Dad," he said, voice rising. "You always act like you know best, but then we end up doing things the way you want them anyway." Froze watching him. Tom was upset, and that wasn't normal for him. He wasn't the type to engage in confrontations. But now he was in the middle of it, his frustration bubbling up. The room, which had once felt warm and inviting, suddenly felt cold, suffocating even. The air thickened with tension, and I could feel the knot tightening in my stomach. I glanced over at my mom, hoping she'd say something to calm the situation down, but she didn't. Instead, she sat there, her arms crossed tightly, her lips pursed, as though she was bracing herself for the storm. And I knew in that moment, this wasn't just a simple disagreement. Something had been building for a long time. I could feel my heart rate pick up. The voices, now louder, echoed around me. I knew this wasn't just going to end with a polite apology. It was too late for that. There were too many unspoken words, too many years of unaddressed issues. The kind of issues that were always pushed aside during family gatherings, only to resurface when everything was supposed to be perfect. As I stood there, paralyzed by the intensity of the moment, I couldn't help but wonder, how did we get here? How did this once peaceful, loving family turn into something that felt so broken? All I wanted was to go back to those moments of laughter, the times when we were all just together, enjoying each other's company. But I knew it wasn't that simple anymore. Tom's voice broke through my thoughts. "I'm tired of this," he said, standing up from his chair. His face was flushed with frustration, and I saw the hurt behind his eyes, the hurt we'd all been avoiding for too long. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just about the stupid holiday planning anymore. This was something deeper, something none of us wanted to face. Family drama, in its rawest, most painful form, had arrived. I felt a wave of helplessness wash over me. What could I possibly do? I didn't want to take sides. I didn't want to make things worse. But I knew if I didn't do something, if I didn't try to stop it now, it was going to get worse. I could already feel the divide forming between all of us, and it scared me. The night didn't get any better. After that dinner, things were still tense. My brother stormed off to his room, muttering something under his breath. My mom and dad barely spoke to each other. I could feel the quiet animosity hanging in the air, and I just couldn't shake it. It wasn't just the argument from the dinner table. It was everything that had been left unsaid, everything we'd pushed to the back of our minds over the years. All the little things we'd avoided, the unresolved conflicts, the simmering resentments, they were all coming to a head. The next day, I tried to pretend that everything was fine. I got up early, made some coffee, and hoped that the quiet morning would somehow heal the damage from the night before. I found my mom in the kitchen, her back to me as she chopped vegetables. She didn't turn around when I walked in, and there was this strange stillness in the air, like we were both pretending things were normal. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. Should I acknowledge the elephant in the room? Or should I keep pretending that nothing happened? "Hey, Mom," I said, my voice hesitant. "Are you okay?" She didn't answer at first. The knife on the cutting board was the only sound for a few moments before she finally spoke. "I'm fine," she said, but the way she said it was anything but convincing. It was a sharp, clipped response, and I could hear the underlying tension in her voice. I decided not to push it. I didn't want to make things worse, so I went back to my room, feeling that same weight in my chest. That quiet, underlying tension was becoming impossible to ignore. It wasn't just about the argument anymore. It was about the way we were all moving around each other, barely speaking, trying to pretend everything was fine. Later that afternoon, we gathered around the living room again. My brother, Tom, had returned from his room, but he didn't seem any less upset. In fact, he seemed more distant than ever. He sat on the couch, his arms crossed, staring at the television but not really watching. My dad was sitting in the armchair, flipping through a newspaper, his jaw tight. My mom was pacing the room, her hands wringing together as she muttered to herself. It was like we were all on edge, waiting for something to happen, but no one was willing to say anything. The silence was unbearable. I watched them, trying to figure out what was going on beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the argument last night. It was the little things, the passive-aggressive comments, the way we all tried to avoid talking about what really mattered. My parents had been like this for as long as I could remember, always pretending that things were fine when they really weren't. That's when I realized it. Family drama isn't always about the big moments. Sometimes it's the subtle things, the undercurrent of resentment that builds over time. It's the way we avoid the uncomfortable conversations, the way we hold on to past hurts without ever really dealing with them. It's the small, passive-aggressive remarks that seem innocent at first, but eventually add up. I couldn't ignore the signs anymore. I had been living in denial, convincing myself that it was just a bad day or a misunderstanding. But I saw it now, the way my family was starting to fracture piece by piece. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. I also began to see how I was reacting to all of this. I had been withdrawing too. I was snapping at little things, frustrated by the tension that I couldn't seem to shake. The more I observed myself, the more I realized that I wasn't just an innocent bystander. I had my own unresolved issues with my family, and I was holding on to my own little grievances without realizing how much they were affecting me. I had to confront the fact that the family drama wasn't just something happening to me. It was something we were all a part of. We were all carrying baggage, holding on to grudges, and avoiding uncomfortable truths. And I knew then, if I didn't do something, if none of us did something, it would only get worse. Family drama isn't a one-time thing. It's a pattern. A cycle of unspoken feelings, unresolved conflicts, and missed opportunities for understanding. But where do you even begin when you're trapped in that cycle? How do you fix something that feels so broken? The next few days felt like we were all walking on eggshells. We'd started to acknowledge the tension, but no one was actually talking about it. Instead, we all found our own ways to cope. My dad kept himself busy with the TV, as if it could drown out the discomfort in the room. My brother Tom spent most of his time locked away in his room, only emerging when he had to. My mom would disappear into the kitchen, cleaning and cooking obsessively, avoiding any real conversation. And I just tried to keep the peace, offering tentative smiles and half-hearted attempts at small talk. But I couldn't ignore it any longer. I knew something had to change. That's when I realized something important. Boundaries. We'd never really talked about them as a family. We'd always just assumed that everything would work itself out, that the chaos would resolve itself if we ignored it long enough. But this time it wasn't going away. I started thinking about my own boundaries too. How many times had I allowed myself to be drawn into other people's dramas, simply because I didn't want to rock the boat? I'd been swept along by the tension, passive and silent, avoiding confrontation. But I was tired of it. I was tired of walking on eggshells, of avoiding the uncomfortable conversations. I decided to talk to my mom first. I figured she'd be the one most willing to listen, even if it was just to vent her frustrations. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I had to do it. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when it so clearly wasn't. "Mom," I said one afternoon as we both stood in the kitchen. The smell of freshly baked bread filled the air, but it didn't seem to bring the warmth it usually did. "We need to talk." She paused, her back to me as she added a few ingredients to a bowl. "About what?" Her voice was soft, but her body language was stiff, like she was bracing herself for something. "This." I gestured vaguely around the room. "The way things have been lately. The arguments, the tension. It's not working anymore. We can't keep pretending like it's fine, Mom." She didn't say anything at first. Her hands kept moving, almost mechanically, as if she was trying to distract herself from the conversation. But I pressed on. "We need to set some boundaries and we need to talk about our expectations. I don't think any of us are doing that right now. I don't think anyone's really saying what they need, and it's just building up." She stopped for a moment, then slowly turned to face me. There was a long silence before she spoke, her eyes looking tired, worn down. "I don't know what you expect me to do. Your dad. He doesn't listen. And Tom. I don't even know where his head's at these days." I sighed, rubbing my temples. "I get it. But we all have to start somewhere. We can't keep living like this. We need to talk openly about things. Maybe we start small, we set some boundaries, clear ones. Like, for example, no more fighting over small things, no more passive-aggressive comments. We need to agree on how we treat each other." She looked at me for a long time, and I could tell she was thinking it over. "And how do we do that?" she asked, the weariness in her voice clear. "How do we just change things overnight?" "I don't know if it'll happen overnight," I said honestly. "But if we don't start now, we'll keep repeating the same mistakes. We all have to agree to change, even if it's just a little bit at a time." There was a long pause as she absorbed what I'd said. Finally, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Let's try. I'll talk to your dad. But you're right. We can't keep going on like this." I felt a small flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Acknowledging the need for change was the first step, even if we weren't all ready to jump in headfirst. At least we could begin setting the groundwork for healthier boundaries. Later that evening, I sat down with Tom. He was in his room, playing video games, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the air. When I knocked, he barely looked up. "What do you want?" he asked, sounding annoyed. I sat on the edge of his bed. "I think we need to talk," I said gently. He sighed and paused his game, finally meeting my gaze. "About what?" "About what happened last week, about everything that's going on," I said, struggling to find the right words. "I know you're upset, and I get it. But we need to set some boundaries too. We can't just keep going on like this, fighting all the time." Tom rolled his eyes. "I don't know. It just feels like nothing's ever going to change." "I get that," I said, nodding. "But if we don't start talking about it, nothing will ever get better. We have to make the effort to change things together. We have to set some boundaries, even if it's small stuff like not yelling over the smallest things or avoiding certain topics that always end in a fight." He looked at me for a long time, his expression softening. "Maybe," he muttered. "But it's hard, you know." "I know. But we've got to start somewhere. If we don't, we're just going to keep hurting each other." Tom sat back, clearly thinking. It wasn't a perfect conversation, but it was a start. At least now we were talking. And sometimes that's all it takes. The following week, things were quieter. There was still tension in the air, but it was different now. At least we were acknowledging it, even if just a little. No one was pretending like everything was okay anymore, and maybe that was a start. But I knew we needed more than just silence to fix things. We needed real communication. I had heard about something called active listening in therapy before, but I had never really tried it in my own family. I figured it was worth a shot, even if it felt a little awkward at first. The idea was simple. Listen without interrupting, without rushing to respond or defend yourself. Just hear the other person out, understand their feelings, and validate them. It seemed like a good way to break the cycle of misunderstandings and frustration that had plagued our family for years. So I decided to give it a try. I started with my mom. She was in the living room, sitting by the window, watching the rain outside. It had been a gray, quiet afternoon, and I could sense that she was lost in her thoughts again. She was often like this, detached, distant. I knew she wasn't happy, but I wasn't sure if she even realized how much she had been closing herself off from the world around her. I sat down next to her, unsure of how to begin. The words felt heavy on my tongue, but I knew I had to say something. "Mom," I said gently. "I've been thinking about everything. About how we've all been acting lately. I know things aren't perfect, but I really want to make things better." She turned to look at me, her eyes tired but softened by my words. "I know, honey," she said quietly. I don't know how to make it better. Everything feels like it's falling apart. I've been trying to hold things together for so long, but I'm not sure I can anymore." My heart clenched at her words. I hadn't realized how much pressure she had been under, how much she was trying to keep everything in balance. It made me realize how important it was to listen, not just to hear the words but to understand the emotions behind them. "I get it, Mom," I said, keeping my voice calm. "It's been hard. But we don't have to do this alone. We're a family and we can work through it together. It's okay to not have everything figured out right now." She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I just don't want to lose you kids," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I don't want to lose my family." And in that moment, I realized how much we had all been holding in. How much we had all been afraid to talk about. All the pain, all the fear of being misunderstood or rejected. It wasn't just about the arguments. It was about the fear of being disconnected from each other. I reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "We're not going anywhere, Mom," I reassured her. "We're all in this together, okay?" That was when I knew. Active listening wasn't just about hearing the words. It was about giving the other person space to share their truth, their fears, their hopes, without judgment. It was about empathy, about trying to understand where they were coming from, even if you didn't agree with everything they said. The next day I decided to try it with Tom. He had been quieter than usual, and I could tell he was still struggling with everything that had happened. I knew he wasn't the best at opening up, but maybe active listening could help him feel heard too. We were sitting in the backyard, both of us staring at the fading sunset. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't the kind of peaceful silence I wanted. It felt more like a wall, one we had both built up over time, stone by stone. I wasn't sure how to break it, but I knew I had to try. "Tom," I said, taking a deep breath. "Can we talk?" He didn't respond right away, and I could see the hesitation in his eyes. But after a moment, he finally nodded. "What's going on?" asked gently. "I know you're still upset, and I get it. But I need to understand. I need to know how you're feeling." Tom didn't say anything at first, but I waited. I didn't interrupt. I just let the silence stretch out, giving him the time and space to speak when he was ready. Finally he sighed, looking down at the ground. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "It just feels like no matter what I do, nothing's ever good enough. I try to make things better, but it never works. And I'm tired of fighting about the same stuff over and over." My heart sank hearing him say that. I hadn't realized how much he was carrying, how much he was internalizing all the tension and frustration in the family. "I understand," I said softly. "It's been hard on all of us. But I need you to know that I'm here for you, Tom. We all are. It's okay to not have all the answers. We're a family, and we're going to work through this together." There was a long pause before he spoke again. His voice quiet but more open this time. "I guess I just want things to feel normal again. I miss when we used to get along, you know? Before everything got so complicated." "I miss that too," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "But I think we can get back to that. It's going to take time, but I believe we can." We just need to listen to each other and be patient. Tom nodded, and for the first time in days, I saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. Maybe things weren't perfect yet, but they didn't have to be. Maybe, just maybe, we could start building something better, together. The weeks that followed felt like a slow but steady process of mending. We weren't fixed, not by a long shot, but things were starting to shift. I could feel it in the way we started talking more openly, in the way the silence didn't feel as heavy anymore. It was as if we were all slowly learning how to breathe again after holding our breath for too long. Mom and Dad had started to open up to each other too. After our conversation, Mom had made a conscious effort to talk to Dad, even though it hadn't been easy. They were taking small steps, like agreeing to set aside time for just the two of them, without the kids or the chaos of life getting in the way. For the first time in a long time, it felt like they were trying to rebuild their relationship, not just as parents but as partners. I noticed it in little things, like when Mom mentioned a new hobby she was picking up, or when Dad started talking about plans for the future. There were no grand gestures, no dramatic declarations, but there was something softer between them. Something that had been missing for a while. Tom was still quiet, but there were moments when I could see him letting his guard down. He was no longer just a distant figure, locked away in his room. Sometimes, when we sat together in the living room, he'd actually join the conversation instead of retreating into his shell. It wasn't a lot, but it was progress. He was starting to trust again, not just in us but in the possibility that things could get better. One night after dinner, I caught him sitting at the kitchen table, looking over something on his phone. I could tell he was trying to figure out something, but he was hesitating. I leaned against the counter, watching him for a moment before speaking up. "Hey, what's going on?" asked, keeping my tone casual. He glanced up at me, looking a little surprised, but then he shrugged. "Just thinking about stuff." "Stuff like what?" I pushed a little, but I didn't want to be too invasive. I knew that when Tom opened up, it had to be on his terms. He sighed, putting his phone down. "I'm thinking about how I want to do better, with the whole family thing. I've been thinking a lot about everything we talked about. I don't want things to stay messed up." My heart swelled with a mix of relief and pride. It was small, but Tom was trying. He was taking responsibility for his part in the family dynamic, something I never thought he'd do. "I'm proud of you," I said, walking over and sitting down beside him. "It's not easy, but we'll get through it. One step at a time, right?" He nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "Yeah, one step at a time." That night, I found myself reflecting on everything we'd been through. There had been so much pain, so much frustration, and so many unspoken emotions. But we had also made progress. We were learning how to communicate better, how to listen to each other, how to set boundaries that actually made a difference. And I realized that while healing takes time, it's also a choice, a decision to keep trying, even when it feels like the work is never ending. The hardest part of all this, I'd learned, was the willingness to forgive. And forgiveness wasn't always as simple as saying, "I forgive you," and moving on. Sometimes it was about acknowledging the hurt, the anger, the resentment, and then choosing to let go of it, not for the other person but for yourself. Forgiveness didn't mean condoning what had happened. It didn't mean erasing the pain. But it did mean freeing myself from the weight of carrying those old wounds. I realized that I couldn't keep holding on to the grudges, the past mistakes, the bitterness. I couldn't move forward if I was still stuck in the past. So I made the decision to forgive, not because I had to, but because I needed to. For my own peace of mind, for my own emotional well-being. And it wasn't just about forgiving the people in my family. It was about forgiving myself too. Forgiving myself for not speaking up sooner, for letting things get out of hand, for not recognizing the warning signs earlier. But now I knew better, and I was learning how to do things differently. One evening, after another quiet dinner, I sat with my mom on the porch, looking at the stars. There was a peacefulness in the air that hadn't been there before. For the first time in a long time, it felt like we were all breathing easier. I said quietly, "I think we're going to be okay." She looked over at me, her eyes soft but full of gratitude. "I think so too, honey. We've got a long way to go, but we're on the right path." And in that moment I believed her. We weren't perfect. No family is. But the truth was, we had something stronger now. Something that couldn't be broken by arguments or misunderstandings or the baggage we'd been carrying for so long. We had each other, and that, in itself, was enough. It had been a few months since we first started the difficult journey of confronting the family drama. A lot had changed. Not in a single grand moment, but in the small, everyday shifts that added up over time. We were all more open with each other now, more willing to listen, to set boundaries, and most importantly, to be vulnerable in a way we hadn't been before. It wasn't perfect. Not by any means. There were still moments when tensions flared, when old wounds were reopened. But now we had the tools to deal with it. We had learned how to communicate, how to be patient, how to forgive. We had learned that healing was a process, not a destination. I remember one evening, about a month after everything started to feel a little more normal, when we all sat down for dinner together. It was the first time in a long while that we hadn't been tense or distracted. We were all laughing, teasing each other like we used to, and I realized, this was the moment I had been hoping for. This was what it felt like when things were right again. Not perfect, not without flaws, but genuine. Mom was talking about her gardening project, her latest hobby, and Tom was joking around about how she was starting to get way too into it. He was teasing her, but with a warmth in his voice that felt different than before. I could see how much he had changed, how much we had all changed. Even Dad, who had been so quiet during the toughest times, was engaging more. He was cracking jokes and sharing stories from his past that we hadn't heard in years. He was starting to open up, and I could feel the weight of the silence lifting with each passing day. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't afraid of the next argument, the next family blow-up. We had done the hard work of facing our issues, and while we weren't perfect, we had built something stronger, a foundation of trust, understanding, and respect. There were still moments when we got upset with each other, when things didn't go the way we wanted, but I had learned to approach those moments differently. I didn't let them spiral out of control anymore. Instead of shutting down or lashing out, I communicated. I listened. I practiced patience, even when it was difficult. And slowly, the drama that had once seemed all-consuming faded into the background, replaced by something healthier, something more real. The hardest part of all was understanding that it wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it. The family drama, the pain, the miscommunication, it had all taught us valuable lessons. It showed us how far we were willing to go for each other, how much we cared, even when it felt like everything was falling apart. I'll never forget the day I realized that things had truly changed. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were all sitting together in the living room, talking about the future. It was light-hearted, easy. No tension. Just family. And that was when I knew we had survived the drama. Not only had we survived it, but we had grown because of it. We had become stronger as individuals and as a family. We had learned how to navigate conflict with grace, how to be more empathetic, and how to set boundaries that protected us rather than kept us apart. I glanced around the room at my mom, Dad, and Tom, and felt a deep sense of peace. We were different now, but in the best way possible. We were no longer stuck in the cycle of unresolved hurt and resentment. We had faced our issues head-on and had come out the other side together. I looked at my family and smiled. "You know," I said softly, "we've been through a lot. But I think we're going to be okay." And this time I knew it wasn't just wishful thinking. It was the truth.